I'm a huge Paul Thomas Anderson fan. He is and has been my favorite director for ages now. The first time I watched One Battle After Another, I definitely liked it, but I was still a bit unsure about what it all meant. Then came my first rewatch of the film in January 2026, and that's when the movie started to click for me. Suddenly I realized that this film is about parenthood, and specifically about choosing your parents, about generational inheritance and a younger generation being forced to navigate the wreckage the older generation left behind. That was the original angle I wanted to explore. In fact, I had already recorded a full video about it. It was supposed to be the first upload on this channel. I was literally about to start editing it, and then I got sidetracked and completely disappeared into my Sinners video instead, which ended up becoming my actual first upload on this channel. Check that one out too, by the way. But while all that was happening, I rewatched One Battle After Another again, a second time, just a few weeks after that first rewatch. And maybe, just maybe, I consumed some of those magical greens beforehand. And on that viewing, the film finally fully clicked for me, I think. Sure, I already knew the movie was politically loaded and very comedic, that much is obvious. But once I watched it while being, well, on some of those greens, something stood out to me. This film is not just a suspenseful political action comedy. It's an absurd, overblown, opera-esque satire, and not only of the political right, but also, and perhaps especially, of the political left. And when I say the film feels opera-esque, I don't mean that it's literally like people are singing. One Battle is obviously not a musical. What I mean is that the film has this opera-esque DNA, emotions dialed to maximum, characters moving like caricatures of archetypes, conflicts staged as larger than life. Opera turns politics into spectacle. It makes private obsession feel cosmic. It floods everything with heightened drama and grand gestures. And One Battle does the same thing. It treats contemporary ideology like a saga, shoots it with epic scale, scores it like prophecy, and then lets the exaggeration expose how theatrical our political roles can become. What surprised me quite a bit is that this film doesn't seem universally agreed upon. If you follow the online discourse around this movie, people are genuinely split, confused on both the left and right ends of the political spectrum. People argue about what the film really means, whether it's stupid, whether it's cynical, whether it's revolutionary propaganda, whether it's mocking revolution altogether, whether it's pro this or anti that. It's one of those films where even the political camps that should feel sure about it don't seem too sure about it, which is quite interesting. I feel like there is no consensus on what the movie is about, and even people whose opinions I highly respect seem to have missed the point of One Battle, which is a shame, because it really is a brilliant film. And as I said, I didn't quite get what the film was trying to do either after my first watch, which is why I think it could be useful to break this film down. So in this video essay, I want to offer a specific reading of the film, that One Battle After Another is a crass political satire, a film that uses exaggerated genre logic, comedic overstatement, and almost mythic Star Wars-like melodrama to critique not just right-wing authoritarianism, but also the chaos, self-seriousness, and fragmentation of leftist movements. And crucially, the film also comments on the limits of white allyship and the white savior figure. By the way, I made a separate video essay on the topic of failed parents, inheritance of consequences, Willa representing the Gen Z, and how she and America have to choose their parents. If you're interested, also check that one out. PTA's smartest move in this film might be that he doesn't tell you it's satire. He lets you misread the movie at first. The prologue of the film, roughly the first 30 minutes or so, everything that happens before the time skip, is engineered to make you believe that this is a serious political thriller. It drops you straight into a tense, heist-like sequence with no explanation, no orientation, no hand-holding. You're immediately trying to track alliances, motives, logistics. The kind of opening that feels like Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. Suspense first, context later. And the way it's staged is important. It's not ironic staging, it's not goofy. It's played with full conviction. This is PTA masking this film as a prestige action thriller. A movie that looks like it's about competent revolutionaries moving through history with precision. But that is just a costume, a mask. Because after the prologue, he snaps the tone so hard it feels like a slap. We jump forward, and one of the first extended present-day scenes is Bob in a parent-teacher meeting. And the contrast is hilarious. He's not a sleek agent anymore. He's not a revolutionary tactician. He's a messy, anxious, stoned dad. He vapes in a school setting like he doesn't even understand what reality he's in. He tries to sound politically sharp and morally serious, and then he starts crying in front of the teacher, breaking down. Not in a heroic way, in an awkward, goofy way. It's a funny scene, but it also functions like a thesis statement. This story is not being told from the perspective of a competent hero. It's being told through a guy who wants to be righteous but can barely hold himself together. And once you notice that, you realize the tonal shift isn't just comic relief. It's the director showing you the frame you're supposed to watch the rest of the film in. He's telling you, yes, the stakes are real, but these people are not the movie heroes you thought they were. They are flawed, ridiculous humans inside an overblown saga. And that's the key to the whole film. One Bell After Another loves its characters. It gives them real emotion, real longing, real pain. But it doesn't take them as seriously as they take themselves. It treats politics like a modern fairy tale. Mythic scale, opera-esque drama, exaggerated archetypes, almost like PTA built a political Star Wars universe that takes place in California instead of a galaxy far, far away. But don't get me wrong, there's a crucial line the film is walking. The reality in the movie is not a joke. The immigration and deportation centers are real. The cruelty of state violence, the fear, the brutality carried out by ICE. That's not the fantasy. The war on the streets isn't imagined, sadly. The film isn't dismissing that suffering, not at all. That's not the satire. What the film does satirize is something else. The childish blockbuster imagination of how political problems get solved. The fantasy isn't oppression. The fantasy is the idea that you defeat oppression by bombing buildings, doing heists, pulling up like a revolutionary SWAT team, and treating fascism like it's a comic book villain that will be defeated if you just punch him hard enough. The French 75 is very G.I. Joe coded at times. It's the kind of political daydream where every moral crisis can be resolved through one big mission, as if the enemy is the Death Star, and if you just blow it up, you win the war against fascism. We see this right in the beginning of the film. The French 75 infiltrate the deportation center at the border to Mexico and free the immigrants in a super dramatic action thriller style. But that doesn't solve the problems. Evidently, after the time skip, fascism still remains. If you look more closely, PTA throughout his career has always been obsessed with tonal ambiguity, the way a moment can be terrifying and ridiculous at the same time. Even There Will Be Blood has that quality. PTA has mentioned that he can laugh at parts of it, and honestly, you can see why. Plainview and Eli are also opera-esque figures. They are almost caricatures of masculine capitalist hunger and greed on the one hand, and religious performance that resembles that of a con artist on the other hand. They scream, they roll around in the mud, they deliver lines like "I drink your milkshake" that are both iconic and slightly absurd. Just look at the scene where Eli slaps Daniel in the face inside the church and he wants to free him of his demons. It's simultaneously completely serious and in its extremity hilarious and even ridiculous. PTA doesn't choose between those tones. He stacks them on top of each other. You can see similar things happening in his other movies too, Phantom Thread or The Master. The films are presented as serious and psychological, but there is some sort of hilarity and comedy in what happens. One Bell After Another does the same thing, just with political archetypes instead of oil barons and preachers. It builds this huge dramatic saga and then lets absurdity leak through the cracks until you realize that the absurdity was part of the design in the first place. So once the film has done its bait and switch with its serious, larger-than-life opening and the subsequent introduction of the awkward, wasted, and hilarious Bob, everything after that starts reading very differently. The code speak, the password, the gadgets, the drama, the underground groups with rituals, all of it becomes less, this is how revolution works, and more, this is how people fantasize revolution works when they turn politics into opera. And that's the perfect bridge into the next layer, the way PTA builds an entire political ecosystem, almost a Star Wars universe, so that politics feels like saga. And saga and self-mythology starts replacing actual consistent political practice. Once the film has flipped that tonal switch, the next thing you start noticing is how mythic the whole world feels. Like PTA isn't just telling a political story, he's building an entire little ecosystem with lore. And this is where the Star Wars comparison that Leonardo DiCaprio mentions in many interviews stops sounding like a random press tour anecdote and starts sounding like an actual key to understanding this film. Because structurally, the movie behaves like a saga. You have clearly defined good guys, the French 75, the remnants of a leftist resistance, and clearly defined bad guys, the Christmas Adventurers Club, the ice-like forces. You have a grotesque Darth Vader-like villain in Lockjaw. In the end, he even comes back from the dead, just like Vader did. You have Avanti, the bounty hunter who is supposed to take out Lockjaw. You have a chosen one in Willa, just like Luke Skywalker, whether she wants that role or not. You have a spiritual mentor figure in Sensei who resembles Yoda or Obi-Wan in a way. You have secret organizations pulling strings in the background. Not only the Christmas Adventurers Club, but also the Sisterhood of the Brave Beaver with their rules, dogmas, rituals, and hidden infrastructure. You have ancient counselor-type figures in these institutions, characters who feel like they've been around forever, guarding a tradition, enforcing a code. You have a resistance that has formed in the background. You have lore. You have history you only glimpse. You have alliances and grudges and ideological feuds that clearly stretch back long before the first frame. And crucially, you have a traitor who disappears, Perfidia Beverly Hills, like a tragic character in a myth who vanishes mid-saga and leaves everyone spiritually orphaned. Even the geography gets mythologized. The climax car chase across those dry, hilly Californian landscapes looks like a chase scene from a space movie. The hills feel like a desert planet. The cars feel like spaceships skimming across terrain. PTA shoots Earth like sci-fi, like he's trying to turn America into a galaxy far, far away without changing the location. And once you see the film as a political fairy tale, the exaggerations resembling that of an opera make even more sense. Fairy tales and sagas aren't subtle. They work with archetypes and melodrama. They inflate moral conflict into symbols. They make the personal feel cosmic. That's what this movie is doing. It's taking contemporary political anxiety and turning it into grand theater. And the interesting twist is that the overblown theater isn't only directed outwards at the villains, it's also directed inward at the heroes. And once you see the film through that lens, the opera-esque tone starts to make sense. It's not just dramatic, it's intentionally over-dramatic, as if PTA were saying, Look at how political people mythologize themselves. Look at how movements turn into legends in their own heads. Look at how the fight against fascism becomes a story people perform, not a political practice people live. And one battle after another keeps showing you how seductive that fantasy is, especially for movements that are exhausted, fragmented, and desperate for a narrative that makes them feel powerful again. So the world building isn't just aesthetic, it's satire. PTA builds a saga-like universe so you can feel the temptation of thinking in sagas, the temptation of treating political struggle like a larger-than-life drama where you get to be the righteous protagonist, where you get to be dramatic, heroic, morally clean. And the film slowly starts exposing what that saga thinking produces. Performative revolution, theatrical codes, and the kind of self-seriousness that collapses in the moment it touches real life, which is where the next step in the argument has to be the French 75, because they are the clearest example of the left turning itself into a mythic opera, confusing spectacle for strategy, and treating revolution like an action franchise instead of a daily practice. The clearest target of that satire is the French 75 themselves, not as people with convictions, but as a certain style of revolutionary self-image, overdramatic, performative, obsessed with spectacle, and weirdly addicted to their own mythology. Because if you just list what they do, it already sounds like a political action video game. We see them bombing places, robbing banks to fund weapons and ammunition, escaping with getaway drivers like it's a heist film. Perfidia Beverly Hills tries to flee by literally sprinting through the city while FBI trucks chase her. It looks like something straight out of GTA 5. And the film leans into that larger-than-life energy on purpose. Teyana Taylor's performance is magnetic, charismatic, commanding. She has that pure movie star force. She feels like a fantasy of revolutionary glamour, the kind of person you'd put on a poster. And that's not me fronting her acting, it's precisely the point. The French 75 carry themselves like icons, like legends in their own heads. And later the same opera-like reality continues in different forms. Bob essentially starts a new life by taking on the identities of people who have just died. The kind of absurd spy movie logic that doesn't belong to realism but does belong to myth. The French 75's communication is full of gadgets and elaborate systems, radio channels, trust devices, verification codes, layers of overly complicated and secret logistics. It's all slightly ridiculous. Especially once the film makes that deliberate tonal pivot after the prologue and reveals just how comedic this world is that these characters are living in. And again, I need to be clear about what the film is doing here. The existence of deportation centers, the cruelty of ICE, the violence of the state, that's real. The political climate and consequences are real. The film isn't saying that oppression is exaggerated. The satire is the fantasy of how you beat oppression. As I mentioned earlier, the French 75 behave like fascism is a Death Star, like you can blow up the right building, pull off the right mission, say the right password, and suddenly you've changed the world. It's G.I. Joe logic. And PTA stages it with enough conviction that for a moment you feel the seduction of it, and then he keeps undercutting it until you realize the seduction is the joke. The sharpest undercut is Bob himself. He's hilarious, but the deeper joke is, this guy is not an action hero. This guy is not even the noble revolutionary. He's the number 12 guy, the washed up dad in a bathrobe who smoked his brain away and somehow got cast as the protagonist of a political thriller. PTA himself described the premise of this film in an interview as follows: what if shit went down, but instead of the fate of the world depending on the usual number 1 action hero, it depends on someone completely unfit for the job, a paranoid, awkward dad running around in the bathrobe. Even the score from Johnny Greenwood highlights this. While the score in the prologue uses that very dramatic theme, throughout the movie we also get this disjunct, chaotic musical motive that feels a bit all over the place. It's a stark contrast to the serious and epic motive, and I think that's intentional. It is like the serious motive is the mask, and the chaotic one is what's really hiding behind it. Also, the Vista Vision large format imagery adds to the sense of everything feeling bigger than life. The frames have this epic clarity and scale to them. But nowhere is the satire clearer than the code speak sequence with Comrade Josh. On the surface, it's one of the funny sequences in the film. Bob can't remember the password, they keep going in circles, and the whole situation becomes this absurd loop of verification while everything around them is falling apart. But it's not just comedy, it's criticism. Because the joke is not only that Bob is too wasted to remember, the bigger joke is that the system exists in the first place. They are using complex, theatrical, agent-style verification rituals when the world is literally burning around them. They have built a language that almost no one understands. They have made communication a performance. They are lost in theory, lost in protocol, lost in their own intelligent signaling, while the urgent real-life stakes demand clarity and action. And Sensei even voices that meta-commentary out loud. He says, "Why not just a one-word password? Why all this nitpicking?" It lands like a practical working-class reality check against leftist intellectualism that turns everything into an internal purity test. You're speaking in code while shit is hitting the fan, and you're acting like the code is the revolution. At some point, even Bob himself is calling out Comrade Josh, saying that Comrade Josh obviously doesn't have kids. This also highlights the contrast between people who actually stand in life, have responsibilities, and are not cosplaying as self-serious political revolutionaries. And the satire of dogma and abiding the rules doesn't stop with code speak. It becomes quite literal in the existence of the sisterhood of the Great Beaver. This is the Friend 75's offspring, and they have basically turned radical politics into a monastery, a leftist nunnery. No Wi-Fi, no toilets, strict structure, out-of-time living. They are not building a future, they are preserving an outdated identity. Activism as substitute religion. And the film gives you this almost heartbreaking image inside that satire. Willa in that relic space, crying on a bed with her phone in her hand. This glowing Gen Z object inside a world that feels like it stopped updating decades ago. A world that is completely out of touch with reality. And Willa's phone is quite central. The Sisterhood of the Brave Beaver freaks out about Willa's phone. Bob freaks out about Willa having a phone too. Everyone acts like the present and the modernization is an intrusion. They treat the phone like some sort of alien object. And that becomes part of the criticism. These people are still fighting the last war, still speaking in an ancient language, still living inside the myth they inherited. Structurally speaking, the Friend 75 are also fragmented. There's no coherent movement left. There are subgroups, sects, traitors, burnouts, people who vanished. Perfidia, who feels like she once embodied the activist group, is gone. Bob is isolated, calling ghosts through passwords. It's a revolution that survived mostly as aesthetics and paranoia. Even their looks reflect that. They dress serious, like secret agents in black, trying to look professional and controlled. And then you have Bob as the bathrobe anomaly that exposes the truth underneath the costume. This isn't a sleek resistance. It's exhausted people clinging to a self-image. And Bob himself is caricature through and through. There's that early moment where he watches the Battle of Algiers while being stoned on the couch, and it's almost too perfect. He is the caricature of the leftist revolutionary. Of course, that is the film he's watching. It's the revolutionary movie. It's like PTA is winking directly at the audience, as if he's purposefully showing you a cliché. And later we even have a scene where Bob screams "Viva la Revolution" to Sensei like a manic person, again, like a caricature of a leftist revolutionary. And the overall feeling is that of big gestures but no infrastructure, explosions but no substance, a fantasy of political power without real daily practice. And the film keeps hinting at why this happens. Revolution becomes theater because theater is intoxicating. Perfidia especially is framed as someone who gets a rush from it. Revolution as adrenaline, as ecstasy, as identity. She tries to maintain a project she can't actually carry, then abandons it. Big words, big drama, then disappearance. It's childish in the most tragic way, a parent building something they can't sustain and leaving the child with the consequences. So yes, this is leftist self-critique and not conservative mockery. PTA isn't saying the left is stupid for wanting change. He's saying, look at what happens when a movement confuses spectacle for strategy, ideology for practice, myth for infrastructure. Look at what happens when people turn politics into opera and then act shocked when it doesn't hold. The film keeps whispering, you're not the heroes, you're the mess the next generation has to survive. So the question becomes, what actually breaks the loop? And the film's answer starts to appear the moment Sensei walks into the story and refuses to be part of the grand opera. Sensei enters the film like a corrective force, not because he's so much cooler or stronger in some action hero way, but because he refuses the theater that Bob plays entirely. Everyone else is performing a role inside the saga. Sensei, on the other hand, is just doing the work. And that difference is so crucial that it actually shows up in how PTA directed the acting performances. In interviews, PTA and Benicio del Toro, who plays Sensei, pointed out that PTA gave actors a lot of freedom, but there was one specific rule for Sensei. He must not catch Bob's energy. They were very strict about Sensei not suddenly matching Bob's chaotic energy. Sensei was not allowed to be influenced or affected by Bob. He can't mirror the paranoia. He can't match the hysteria. He can't become another French 75 actor in the drama. Benicio has to stay grounded even when Leo is spiraling. That's not just acting direction, it's a crucial part of the film's messaging. While Bob is a manic storm, Sensei is the structure that doesn't simply collapse just because a storm passes through. When Bob shows up at Sensei's dojo or later at Sensei's shelter, he moves like a man trying to outrun his own nervous system. Pacing, scanning, catastrophizing, jumping from worst case scenario to worst case scenario. He's frantic, loud with urgency, loud with performance. Sensei meanwhile stays grounded and almost stubbornly undramatic. He walks through his environment like someone who has accepted reality without surrendering to it. He's calm, solution-oriented, and weirdly gentle. Not naive, not soft in a clueless way, but steady, stoic. He uses kindness and humility like tools. He doesn't romanticize the struggle. He doesn't inflate himself. He doesn't treat politics like theater. He treats it like responsibility. Even the detail with a beer matters a lot. It's played as humor. Sensei casually drinking a beer here and there. It's funny, but it's also quietly revealing. He knows how to let pressure pass through him without becoming dysfunctional. He copes, he decompresses, but he remains functional. Bob, by contrast, is completely consumed by his intoxications and escapism. He smoked his brains away. Sensei, on the other hand, understands that a light booze every now and then helps to deal with the reality, but it's important to not get consumed by that entirely. And then there's also an important structural decision. Sensei doesn't follow Bob all the way to the end. He helps, but he doesn't abandon his own mission. He doesn't sacrifice his community for Bob's narrative. He cares for him, yes. He's a fellow traveler, a comrade, part of the same moral universe. But he draws a line. There is something bigger than Bob. There is something bigger than the French 75. And that's the whole point. Sensei embodies a kind of political sentiment that is not centered on drama, but on responsibility. This is where the satire of the French 75 becomes very clear, because Sensei is basically the counter-argument, the antithesis to their entire existence. The French 75 is all about spectacle, big gestures, covert outfits, theatrical seriousness, explosions, mythology, hero fantasies. They feel like an intelligence agency cosplay of revolution, especially in those early scenes where they dress like agents in black, operating with elaborate verification systems and gadgets as if political activism is a James Bond film. Sensei's organization, on the other hand, doesn't even have a name. It's underground, low-key, almost anonymous. It doesn't brand itself, it doesn't posture, it doesn't need to be seen. And the most important difference, it actually helps. Sensei shelters dozens of undocumented immigrants. He keeps people safe. He does the unglamorous work. It's daily political practice as discipline. And it's so grounded that it almost makes the French 75 look like kids playing war. Even the visual language supports it. The French 75 dress like they are trying to be taken seriously. Sensei, meanwhile, is dressed in a Puma tracksuit. He doesn't inflate himself into a myth. He doesn't exaggerate his role, even though he has every reason to. If anything, Sensei is the person in the film carrying more real responsibility than Bob. His shelter has dozens of lives depending on him. Bob's crisis is emotionally enormous, no question. His daughter is kidnapped. But Sensei is literally responsible for a whole vulnerable network. And yet, Sensei remains calm while Bob falls apart. The film is showing you, in the most basic human terms, what actual sustainability looks like. One of my favorite micro moments that captures this difference is the goodbye moment. Sensei tells Bob to stay confident, to have courage, to have trust. Bob responds like he's still stuck in a movie, hyped up, emotional, shouting "Viva la Revolution," still addicted to big symbolic gestures. Sensei's vibe is almost like, "Cool bro, just do your job." He's not seduced by the romance of it. And then there's another micro metaphor. When Bob enters Sensei's dojo, he's hectic and is looking for guns, rifles, big weapons, something cinematic. But Sensei only has nunchucks. It's a joke on the surface, but it's also a thesis statement in a way. The fight against fascism isn't won by the fantasy of having the biggest gun in the room. It's won by discipline, by repeated practice, by smaller tools used consistently. Nunchucks versus rifles, daily practice versus one spectacular explosion. The movie even tests Bob to prove the point. The moment Sensei does give him a rifle, more responsibility, more hero energy, and then leaves him to handle things, Bob fails almost immediately. He runs across rooftops, falls, gets tased, gets captured. No plot armor. Just incompetence. And he only gets out of it through Sensei's connections. Which brings me to one of the core themes inside the satire the film points at. Bob is not the savior. Sensei and Willa are. And that matters because it flips a very common Hollywood pattern. So often, political movies still end up centering the white guy as the decisive moral agent, the one who rescues, fixes, solves, redeems. Here, Bob keeps fucking up. He's not the liberator. He's not the revolution. He's barely even competent. Meanwhile, Sensei, a grounded working-class communal figure, does the real work. He protects people, he builds systems, he's calm, composed, competent. He treats vulnerable people like individuals, not background props. One scene in this film is very revealing on what kind of character Sensei is. When Sensei brings Bob home to his shelter, he doesn't just say, "Here are the immigrants." He introduces them properly, one by one, with respect. These aren't numbers. They aren't background characters. They are people with real struggles, with their own story. And the way Sensei insists on that is humility in action, and a moral correction of the French 75's tendency to turn politics into sage play. Even Sensei's refusal to get sucked into Bob's phone obsession fits this same idea. Bob is frantic about charging the phone, making the calls, accessing the old network, re-entering the myth of his former movement. Sensei doesn't play along. He doesn't treat the phone call as the holy revelation Bob thinks it is, because Sensei's world isn't held together by codes and verification devices. It's held together by real relationships. One of the most quietly beautiful moments is when Sensei tells a kid in Spanish something like, "There's no reason to be afraid. We will be with you the whole time, and God will be with us." Whether you read that as literal faith or just language that comforts frightened children, it shows something essential. Sensei's politics are not just ideological, they are pastoral, protective. He's parenting in a way. He's raising the next generation through safety and stability, not paranoia and spectacle. This also connects perfectly to my other video on the parenting and passing the torch message of the film. There's another little moment during that whole segment. It's when Bob and Sensei finally make it to Sensei's shelter. Bob is ecstatic, but Sensei tells him to get back on defense. It's almost the opposite of the Friend 75 mindset. It's not "we're about to win the war." It rather is the sentiment of, "You scored, great, now reset, stay disciplined. The fight isn't over, step by step, one battle after another." So if the Friend 75 are the film's satire of the left as performance, then Sensei is the film's insistence that there is another left, a less glamorous one, that is actually capable of holding people together and building sustainable structures that protect community. The people who are doing the meaningful work in the story aren't the washed-up white allies who mean well. The people doing the meaningful work are the one closest to violence. Sensei builds infrastructure, he shelters people, he protects the community, he stays calm under real responsibility. Willa survives, fights, adapts, and ultimately saves herself. Even when Bob is present, he's not the engine of liberation, he's just present. He's someone who shows up and tries not to make things worse. That's the limit of allyship, and the film knows it. Allies can support, allies can amplify, allies can care, allies can raise someone better than themselves, but they cannot substitute lived struggle. They cannot become the central voice of the oppressed if they are not part of that group to begin with. And that's why One Battle After Another feels like more than anti-right propaganda. It's also a self-critique from within a left space. It's PTA looking at the mythology of resistance and saying, if your revolution still needs a white protagonist to be meaningful, you're already lost. This is also why the Oscar conversation I talked about in another video matters, by the way. Not because awards are sacred, but because institutions love to recenter exactly what films like this are trying to decenter. And that brings us to the next question the movie keeps circling around. What are we supposed to make of the right-wing side of this saga? Everything revolving around Lockjaw and the Christmas Adventurers Club. They are organized, are unified, and yet look so ridiculous. The right-wing world in One Battle After Another is presented in a way that's almost too funny and ridiculous. Because the Christmas Adventurers Club doesn't just read like the enemy, it reads like a caricature of the enemy, the kind of hyper-stylized, slightly unreal villain that feels like it could only exist inside a political imagination. In that sense, it really does feel like a leftist fantasy of the right. The fascists as a secret society hiding behind rituals, corridors, and absurdly theatrical seriousness. Fascists as unhinged lunatics. But PTA doesn't let it stay at the level of fantasy. He gives the caricature an anchor in something far more real, banality. The club's hiding place is ridiculous on paper. This overcomplicated structure where you move through spaces you wouldn't expect, almost like you're unlocking a secret level in a video game. Yet the path to it begins in the most normal, non-threatening image imaginable, an unremarkable suburban home. A sweet old lady, white comfort, the aesthetic of nothing to see here. That's the mask, that's the point. The horror isn't always a boot on your neck in public. Sometimes it's a polite front door in a wealthy neighborhood. A warmth that looks like innocence, a surface that reads as American normal. And yes, the Christmas Adventurers Club is funny and ridiculous, but it's only funny in the way Dr. Strangelove is funny. You're laughing, and then you realize what you're laughing at is basically the emotional immaturity of people shaping the world. That Strangelove comparison matters because it reframes what PTA is doing here. He's saying that the people acting like they hold the fate of nations are, at their core, still just people. Needy, status-hungry, insecure, theatrical, immature people. The grand political conflict becomes underneath a set of human dramas. Men hiding behind their ideology the way other men hide behind weapons. And the club itself feels less like a government apparatus and more like a scout troop for aging boys. That's what makes it so sharp. These fascist structures are shown as terrifying but also deeply pathetic. It's just a bunch of insecure men who desperately want to belong to something that feels important. They want status, prestige, ritual, and maybe most of all, they want membership. They want to feel like they were chosen. Lockjaw embodies that hunger perfectly. He isn't just driven by ideology, he's driven by the need to be validated by the ideology's gatekeepers. He's obsessed with getting into the club, obsessed with being recognized by it, obsessed with proving himself worthy of the badge. He wants to be one of them, and one of the movie's main plot themes is that he is in fact not one of them, because he did something that is not approved by the club he wants to belong to. He had an interracial relationship. The club members being so visually bland is also not a throwaway joke. It's one of the film's most cheeky observations. White supremacy as an infinitely exclusionary, self-destructive ideology carried by the most generic Patagonia sweater-wearing men you've ever seen. Not cartoon supervillains, not unhinged demons, just casual middle-aged white men. Men who want to be part of a club. Men who want to feel like the world is theirs again. Lockjaw, of course, is the melodramatic version of that banality. He's so exaggerated he almost becomes a walking punchline. The way he speaks, the way he moves, the hair, the microtics, the smug physicality. So the Christmas Adventurers Club becomes this perfect double image. On one level, it's the left's nightmare fantasy of the right. A shadowy, mythic villain cult hiding in secret corridors. A completely deranged villain. But on another level, it's also the right as it actually operates socially, hidden behind normality, fooled by belonging, sustained by banality, and populated by people who do not look like classic movie villains. And the contradiction, ridiculous yet deadly, is exactly where PTA's satire lands, because when the right becomes openly unhinged, it's easy to treat it as spectacle, as a South Park episode. But the more frightening truth is that it often spreads through ordinary spaces, ordinary aesthetics, and ordinary people who just want to feel important. Which brings us to something even more unsettling. The way the film suggests that these extremes don't merely fight each other, they sometimes need each other. The relationship between Perfidia and Lockjaw is one of those things that feel almost too weird to be accidental. PTA is using sex as political metaphor in the most literal way possible. Because the more you watch their dynamic, the clearer it becomes. They don't just oppose each other in a twisted way, they need each other. There's a cynical political truth that extremes often feed off one another. The right needs the image of radical leftists who blow up things because it justifies repression, surveillance, and the permanent state of emergency. And the left, at least in its most performative form, can become energized by the existence of an obvious villain, because a clean enemy makes your identity feel clean too. The film doesn't just suggest that intellectually, it stages it as desire. In that hotel room scene, for example, the erotic charge is impossible to miss. Perfidia holds the gun playfully, like a threat she controls, and Lockjaw is visibly turned on by it. She enjoys having power, being dangerous, being able to destabilize him. He enjoys being destabilized in a way that still centers his fantasy. Danger as thrill, threat as kink, proximity to violence as arousal. It's like the film is saying these extremes don't just clash. They excite each other. They perform for each other. They build each other's mythology. It becomes cops and robbers as political structure. And it also opens the door to something even uglier in Lockjaw's case. The possibility that his attraction is entangled with fetishization of blackness. Desire mixed with dominance. Lust mixed with the impulse to control. The kind of closeted, unreciprocated hunger that can develop into racism, or the colonial logic where the body you objectify becomes the body you feel entitled to own. The film doesn't make this tidy, and it shouldn't. It's staging oppression not as cold abstraction, but as something that can be intimate, hungry, even humiliating. Perfidia's side of the equation is just as revealing. The film repeatedly frames her as someone who gets high off the mission itself. Revolution as adrenaline, revolution as ecstasy. You feel it in the way she moves after the heists, in the sloppy kiss with Bob, in the horniness that flares up during missions. It's like the French 75 aren't only chasing justice, they're chasing a rush, a feeling, a sense of purpose that becomes erotic because it makes them feel alive. And that's where PTA's satire becomes painful instead of smug. He isn't mocking the desire to fight oppression. He's showing how easily the fight can become performance, and how easily performance can become addiction. Addiction to danger, addiction to identity, addiction to the myth of being the protagonist of history, of being the main character. So if the film is staging politics as opera, this is the opera's most honest confession. Sometimes the extremes don't just fight, they dance. They dance with one another. They escalate each other. They keep each other's story going, because without the enemy, you lose your role. In the end, I don't think One Bell After Another is cynical about politics in general. It's cynical about performance. It's not telling you the stakes are fake. It's telling you our myths about the stakes can be. That we love imagining fascism as a final boss, as the Death Star that we just need to blow up. And we love imagining resistance as a cinematic mission, because it feels cleaner than admitting the truth. That change is slow, exhausting, repetitive, and often unglamorous. PTA builds the whole thing like a suspenseful opera, a political opera, but then deflates that balloon immediately to show us how ridiculous these leftist revolutionaries are behind their mask. What matters is discipline, care, community, and the willingness to keep showing up, which is embodied by both Sensei and Willa. And maybe most importantly, the film shows that the heroic figure is not the white savior, but instead the oppressed themselves.